Let's talk about the budget now, and I'm going to let Catherine maybe start us on that pathway here. Maybe address this one to Mr. Stillwell. But what's a question that you might have along the budget lines?
Great, thank you. So Representative Jim Pitts told Quorum Report recently that once the legislature gets back in session in January, there's going to be an immediate IOU due for $4.7 billion to pay prior Medicaid bill. The state's been running up a Medicaid credit card, and we have to pay it back. Will you fully fund, first of all, will you support an immediate item to help pay that bill for Medicaid? Second, will you fully fund Medicaid in the next session, or will you just look to pass the buck to a future legislature like they did in 2011?
Well, the idea of passing an item to raise taxes to pay for Medicaid, I can't in good conscience advocate raising taxes. The budget process is so opaque and dishonest that I don't know if that's justified. Redirected fees and taxes that are intended for one purpose get routed into the general revenue fund, and it's a big black hole. In Texas, Governor Perry likes to say that we have a Texas miracle because we balance our budget, but it should really be called the Texas Magic Show. It's done, the budget is balanced with accounting tricks and smoke and mirrors, and it's not a true balanced budget. Writing IOUs to the next budget session is not the right way to balance a budget. I can't balance my budget in my business that way. The state shouldn't be allowed to balance its budget in that way either. So yeah, we have a multi-billion-dollar Medicaid bill coming due in the next session, not to mention a structural budget underfunding of schools that exists. So every time a new session walks in the door, they're in the hole for $5–10 billion of the budget. We have to fix that. We have to put our house in order as the budget goes, find the money to pay for the services that society has said are important, whether that's Medicaid or schools or roads or whatever it is, and make our budget process more transparent and open.
Mr. Dale?
Well, I don't see any reason why the Medicaid shortfall is not going to be funded this next session. I'd certainly be in favor of making sure that's covered. I'm committed to not raising taxes as the next state representative from the Cedar Park, Leander, and Brushy Creek area, and I've made a commitment to do so. We do have diversion of funds where there's dedicated accounts that are being used to balance the budget. I'm committed to working out a way where those funds are either used for the purpose that they're collected or they're not collected at all. It's just not appropriate to take in funds for a purpose and use it simply to balance the budget. So that is a problem. I've also committed to making sure that our level of spending does not increase past the rate of growth, population growth, and inflation. So I'm a fiscal conservative. I got a record on Cedar Park City Council of not raising taxes, paying down our city debt, and I intend to do the same thing at the state legislature.
Now, there's more to talk about on the budget. Mike, I'll let you ask another question in that area.
Thank you. Well, you know, there's always a revenue shortfall, and it's usually how do you pay for it if you're wanting all these additional services? And is it going to be tax increases, or do you favor going into the rainy day fund? I guess I would like Mr. Stillwell to answer.
I believe the rainy day fund should really be used for one-time emergency expenditures. There was a big outcry to use the rainy day fund to fund schools in the last session, and perhaps that was a good idea because of the drastic cuts that we were going to take. But as a rule, I think that should not be a fund that gets raided every budget session with a shortfall. The reason why we have a structural budget underfunding is because of the margins tax that was instituted in 2006. They knew at the time they voted on it that it was going to underperform by about $5 billion a year. It has underperformed by about $5 billion a year. And I think the logical and reasonable thing to do would be to fix that margins tax. It passed because there were so many loopholes and exemptions granted in the margins tax that it doesn't perform the way it should. So we need to examine those loopholes and those exemptions and weigh them against the value of a highly educated workforce or a funded water plan or whatever we want to talk about that we want to spend. But the margins tax has not performed like it should, and we need to re-examine that.
And as you're about to answer, Mr. Dale, the news that came out in addition from the Comptroller's office is that there will be an additional $2 billion anticipated now in the rainy day fund. I think that makes it at maybe $8.2 billion. So, but your thoughts?
Yeah, well, one of the things I learned prior to getting on Cedar Park City Council and then getting on council is that you don't really know everything there is to know about a budget until you're presented with the numbers. You know, you've got to wait for the tax rolls to come in and know exactly what's happening. So you've got to look at it in the entire context of what's happening in the state. We've been fortunate in Cedar Park to have a fund balance, which is the same thing as a rainy day fund, and use it responsibly. And I think it's important to have that in reserve. You know, I think we are facing likely to see more money come into budget this year, into the state, I should say. But there's no telling whether or not it's going to be there the years after that. About 10% of the income that we get tax-wise at the state is coming from the oil and gas industry. And the gas industry is not doing as well as the oil industry right now. So you've got to be careful, look long-term, not just look from one budget to the next. And it's important to be conservative in how you use those dollars.